It's the Charlotte Talks Friday News Roundup here on 90.7 WFAE. I'm Eli Portillo, in this morning for Mike Collins. This week, Mecklenburg County Commissioners voted on whether to increase the countywide sales tax by 1 percentage point to fund the transit plan. Supporters say it's needed as the region grows. Detractors worry about the cost and who will pay. Nancy Mace throws her hat in the ring for South Carolina governor. North Carolina Governor Josh Stein signed the state's mini-budget, which he said is just a Band-Aid. And hopes are high as the Panthers open preseason play because football hope springs eternal in August, right? Joining me to talk about all these stories and more are WFAE politics reporter Steve Harrison, Julian Berger, who covers immigration for WFAE, Mary C. Curtis, columnist at Rollcall and host of the Equal Time podcast, and Hunter Sáenz, reporter for WSOC-TV. Thank you all for being here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's start with some news that came out yesterday from the Mecklenburg County Commission, and it's not transit. Commissioners decided in a closed session on Wednesday to end all negotiations with the Peebles Corporation. That's the developer that the county hired to redevelop Brooklyn Village 9 years ago, but they have not built a single apartment yet. In July, the Florida-based Peebles company told the county that there was asbestos that would make it so they could not demolish the old Board of Education building and would miss a critical deadline. The county said that claim was meritless, so Steve, where are we now in this saga? And keeping in mind that it's been basically a decade since this started, how did we get here?
Yeah, it has been 9 years since the county picked the Peebles Corporation to redevelop Brooklyn. A master development agreement was signed 7 years ago, and like you said, Eli, nothing has been built. There's been a lot of growing frustration among county commissioners about the slow pace or the lack of any progress on this. And we have kind of two key issues. You mentioned that July 28th deadline for Peebles to knock down the Board of Education building, which was not met. The county, is the commissioners are holding them to that deadline. So there was a decision made not to give them an extension, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing that came out of the meeting was that the commissioners kind of unanimously agreed that they're just not interested in working with Peebles anymore. I mean, we could continue negotiating over trying to get affordable housing built and trying to get something built on the site, but commissioners decided they're just not interested. And so the shift now turns to the off-ramp, to how do we get out of this? And that's going to take a long, long time.
So to be clear, nothing has been built yet for the Brooklyn Village development. And now with this latest stop in negotiations and this latest decision, we're probably launching the county on years of litigation. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that, we've talked about this kind of being a 9-year process. I think this in a way puts us at halftime of this whole saga, right? Because now we have to unwind the whole process. And so the Peebles Corporation owns one parcel of land, 5.5 acres across from the Mecklenburg County Aquatic Center. They have they believe a contractual right to buy 2 other parcels. So this just, the county can't just walk away. This is going to take a long, long time to sort out. But again, the headline is the commissioners unanimously, they just decided we're over this.
So bigger picture here, stepping back, this is a project that was supposed to redevelop part of Uptown, which used to be the African-American neighborhood of Brooklyn. That was torn down, basically completely demolished, except for a half dozen buildings in the 1960s and 70s as part of what was then called urban renewal. Part of the county's excitement about redeveloping all of this is that they were planning to make up for some of that in a way, include affordable housing, make it so that people could move back to this area, even though it's, been decades, so that someone could live in this area that was demolished and replaced pretty much with the sterile government buildings. As you said, we're maybe just at halftime of this process and nothing has been built. Still, Mary, what does this whole process say about the efforts to make up for urban renewal and the wrongs that were done back then?
Well, it was so difficult then that you said urban renewal, but there was the word urban removal because it happened in so many communities that were bulldozed through. And we know the stories of some of them replaced with sterile areas or sometimes highways. And in the case of Brooklyn, there really wasn't a concerted plan of where these folks would go. And you still see the nostalgia for it when you have reunions of folks for Second Ward, high school, and other things. And I think it adds to a legacy of disappointments and promises broken to a community that was skeptical from the very beginning. And you would think after all these years that something would have been done. Of course, in those days when this happened, many African Americans did not have a political stake. They didn't have power. And so now the thought is, let's do what we can do. So in a sense, I think you'll have to have something happen before people will really say, okay, there has been, making up for what was a wrong. And there's still such a need for affordable housing, as we've seen in Charlotte, which is a part of the legacy of all of that. And this was brought on with such grand plans of mixed use and affordable housing and retail. And then again, what do we see? Nothing. So I think folks will be anxiously but skeptically looking for next steps.
And we'll see what happens. And maybe it won't take another decade. Maybe it will. But we'll be talking about it here on Charlotte Talks either way. Sticking with the county, commissioners voted 8-1 Wednesday night to place a 1-cent sales tax increase on the November ballot. This will be a referendum that you get the final word on whether the tax increase happens or not. This plan would raise billions of dollars for trains, roads, buses, on-demand microtransit. Supporters packed the government center wearing Yes for Mech shirts on Wednesday. Opponents, like the lone no vote, Commissioner Susan Rodriguez McDowell, once again pointed out that the issues Matthews has brought up in the past haven't been resolved, and there's still anger that the Silver Line light rail won't extend that far.
Some have written letters to us saying, just pass the plan for now and amend it later. Well, the mayor of Matthews asked repeatedly for other formulas to be studied, and he was met over and over with a brick wall. There is no way that the people can trust a pass now, amend later plan.
But supporters say it's necessary that we're at a now or never moment to get ahead of worsening congestion and correct some of the inequalities that have long been a problem in Charlotte. Here's Tanya Jameson with Leading on Opportunity speaking Wednesday.
This referendum is our chance to make a big leap for everyone. Yes, it's bold. Yes, there will be lumps, but we can't afford to do nothing. We can't stop growth, nor would we want to, but we must take action to make sure it's done equitably. So please vote yes and let the people decide. Thank you.
So again, this will be on the ballot in November. The next decision is yes or no, coming down to the voters. What are the main arguments we're hearing for and against, and what does this 3-month sprint that we are heading into look like, Steve?
Yeah, I think on the side that wants that supports the tax, I mean, there was kind of a broad array of talking points, that this is important to relieve congestion, to keep up with growth, to give people transportation alternatives. And then on the opposition side, it was interesting, we talked about Matthews Mayor John Higdon being upset the Silver Line won't go to his town. Higdon did not attend the public forum. He's kind of taken a back seat now. He was raised a lot of concern about this over the past year, but he's taking a step back. The concern that the people in opposition to this came really from the far left. People like former Charlotte City Council member Braxton Winston, former Mayor Jennifer Roberts, Robert Dawkins of Action NC. They raised questions like feeling like the sales tax is regressive, doesn't do enough for low-income residents, et cetera. So if you judge it by the mood in the chamber on Wednesday, that this will pass overwhelmingly because, like you said, that the supporters of the tax really came out in force. With a wide, kind of array of people from different areas of the county. And they kind of launched this campaign on a strong note.
Well, I guess it's all down to November's vote now, so we'll see what happens. And again, this is going to be on the ballot. These municipal off-year elections usually have a turnout somewhere in the low teens, but if you are a voter in Mecklenburg County, you will have the chance to make a billions of dollar decision in November. So maybe we'll see voter turnout improve a little this off-year. Meanwhile, in Raleigh, the fallout continues over comments from Mecklenburg State Representative Carla Cunningham. She crossed party lines to override a veto by Roy Cooper, who was then governor, for a bill that would mandate sheriffs to cooperate more closely with ICE immigration enforcement. Excuse me. But it wasn't just how Cunningham, a Democrat, voted, but what she said.
All cultures are not equal. Some immigrants come and believe they can function in isolation.
Julian, you've been talking with advocates in Charlotte this week. What have you been hearing from the local community?
Yeah, I think people, regardless of how she voted, they're very frustrated with what she said. They're very shocked that this is coming from a Democrat in office, and that this is coming from a person of color in office. And talking about her constituents as well, a bunch of people that live in her district are Hispanic, are immigrant, are Black, are brown. So for Representative Cunningham to say comments like this is very shocking to them.
And one of those folks you talked to, Wendy Mateo Pascual, expressed those sentiments.
The immigrant community in North Carolina, and I think around the country, has shows that we integrate and we are a force in the community.
And despite all of the backlash and attention on immigration enforcement, right now we've seen national numbers this week that ICE arrests have actually dropped 20% last month. Does that jibe with what you're seeing locally, at least anecdotally, Julian?
Yeah, so I've been speaking with a bunch of nonprofit leaders, specifically Carolina Migrant Network, who they get tips on the arrest in the area by ICE, and they say their calls have gone down. They haven't received as much calls as, for example, in May when there was a bunch of ICE activity here in the city. So their calls have gone down. Immigration lawyers as well. They've been telling me that their cases are more focused on TPS, on visas, and their cases on detentions have kind of gone down as well.
And do people feel like it's the calm before the storm or a real change? What's kind of the sentiment
Yeah,
when you're talking to those folks?
that's exactly what somebody said. Somebody told me from Carolina Migrant Network, it's kind of the calm before the storm. They know that ICE recently got more funding in their budget, and so they're kind of waiting to see what happens in the future.
And among the groups who criticized Carla Cunningham for her comments were the Young Democrats of North Carolina. They said she disgraced her office with a hate-filled speech, attacking the very immigrant communities she was elected to serve. Before we move on, has she responded directly to any of this criticism?
Not that I know of. I haven't seen any response from her.
Well, we will see what happens, and we'll also keep tracking this story. I know you will if there's going to be any opposition that emerges in the form of a primary opponent. So stay tuned for more. When we return here, politics season is heating up, even though the 2026 election is still more than a year away. But I guess politics is always at a rolling boil these days. We'll talk about the South Carolina race and more, excuse me, next on Charlotte Talks.
On the next Charlotte Talks, Charlotte Pride celebrates its 25th anniversary next weekend. The festival and parade is moving to First Ward Park in Uptown this year. Another change includes anti-DEI backlash that has made corporate sponsorship a challenge. We discuss what Pride means for Charlotteans past, present, and future. Monday at 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
All eyes are on Texas after Democrats flee the state to stop a Republican plan for redistricting. This week on the Friday News Roundup, the standoff over new GOP congressional maps and nationwide reaction. Plus, new tariffs, the White House plans a response to the Epstein controversy, and HHS Secretary RFK Jr. guts vaccine funding. Next time on 1A.
You can catch 1A this morning at 10 on WFAE.
I'm climate reporter Zachary Turner. This summer, WFAE is reporting on how severe weather is changing in the Carolinas.
There are no climate havens anymore, and people need to hear that.
Keep up with WFAE's climate coverage on Morning Edition and All Things Considered, and online at wfe.org/climate news. WFAE's climate coverage is supported, in part, by grants from the Salamander Fund and Green South Foundation.
It's the local news roundup here on Charlotte Talks on 90.7 WFAE. I'm Eli Portillo in this morning for Mike Collins. Joining me to talk about all the news of the week, we have Steve Harrison, WFAE's politics reporter, Julian Berger, who covers immigration for WFAE, Mary C. Curtis, columnist at Rollcall and host of the Equal Time podcast, and Hunter Sáenz, a reporter for WSOC-TV. So we had another announcement this week from someone who wants to be South Carolina's next governor. Representative Nancy Mace, a Republican who's often in the national news, threw her hat in the ring. She's running in a very crowded Republican primary to succeed Henry McMaster, who's term limited.
We will be courageous. We will be resilient.
So, Mary, what do we know about this race and her positions, and who else is running?
Well, you heard her announcement. She's never been exactly a shrinking violet. She wasn't there. And it's going to be a very crowded race. Governor Henry McMaster's term limited. And in South Carolina, whoever wins the Republican primary to run for governor has a pretty good chance of being governor. So she's the fifth person throwing her hat into the ring, so to speak. And she has a competition from her fellow representative, U.S. Representative Ralph Norman. We have State Senator Josh Kimbrell, the Lieutenant Governor, Pamela Yvette, I think, and the Attorney General Alan Wilson. And she goes in with pretty high name recognition and familiarity, for good and ill, I might say, because she is often in the national news. She's making a lot of noise. She does a lot of TV appearances. And she's had this on again, off again relationship with Donald Trump, though right now she's one of his biggest backers. And it might be a competition to see who is the closest to Donald Trump, actually. But yeah, so she has name recognition, and they're pretty much going after each other. She's saying she's very loyal to Trump and that she's going to go in there and really make a difference for South Carolina. And we'll see how it plays out. But yes, that it'll be who can be closest to Trump, I would say. But yes, she has been, you see her often on national news programs. She was the first woman to graduate from the Corps of Cadets at the Citadel, which is where I believe she made her announcement. She did run against once Lindsey Graham to be the U.S. Senator. She didn't really make a dent into that. But it'll be interesting to see this campaign, which might see some real intra-party nastiness.
And you mentioned this already, but are there any substantial policy differences we're seeing between them, or are we seeing candidates mostly angling for that Trump endorsement? Because it looks to me like whoever he endorses in the primary is probably going to win and will probably almost certainly then be the next governor. So is this really a race right now with an audience of one?
Well, they'll be angling for that. We saw before when she was on the outs with him that she actually went outside of Trump Tower with a sign to woo Trump. And since then, he's been a very strong supporter. So we don't know what will happen. As far as policy differences, beforehand, you were saying that she was just talking about chemtrails and she would want to ban them, which I think there aren't really a thing. I believe it's a conspiracy theory about
that was
chemical trails.
Someone asked her that at a forum, and she said, yes, she would be open to banning those. But yeah, that's not really a thing, that planes are spraying chemicals on us, but that's another discussion.
Yes, but we might see a lot of these other theories being floated among these folks. She definitely will be the PR person. She'll be out there in front and we'll have a very big megaphone. It'll be interesting to see who gets the Trump nod.
Well, In Mecklenburg County, Sheriff Gary McFadden is also drawing some challengers. Now, I think he hasn't said officially if he is running again, but he's widely expected to. Hunter, who else is jumping into the race to be the next Mecklenburg County sheriff, and why do they say change is needed?
So first, the candidates, one of them announced, of course, just this week, Rodney Collins. He is a retired chief deputy. He served 30 years at the sheriff's office. Before that, he was in the Air Force. And then we also have former detention officer Antoine Nance, and then former CMPD Sergeant Ricky Robbins. They are running against Collins. And the reason that I don't say McFadden is because, like you said, he hasn't announced. However, I will say in an interview in January, and this gets to the reasons he is seeing some challengers. In an interview in January of this year, he had said he would likely run for sheriff after there was a lot of media reports and a lot of former employees that were talking with the press and making some pretty big, significant allegations that his jail was a toxic work environment, that it was an unsafe jail. Of course, a few years ago, we had the state investigation into staffing shortages. We've seen him close Jail North, which was our juvenile facility here in Mecklenburg County. We have had in-custody deaths that have made headlines here. And then, of course, his handle on working or not working with immigration officials and law enforcement in that regard.
And that was just a reminder for folks, the issue that really propelled him to the sheriff's office and to become sheriff in 2018, where he made his trademark issue kind of not cooperating with ICE and pulling the county out of the 287G voluntary cooperation program. Of course, sheriffs and ICE cooperation have been front and center in the news this year. Julian, do you think that this is going to be something that we see play out in the next sheriff's race next year?
Most definitely. I was looking at a Charlotte Observer article with Ricky Robbins, and he says that he supports cooperation with all levels of law enforcement, including ICE. So it seems like Robin will take a stronger stance on ICE and will work with ICE a little more than McFadden has been wanting to since he's been sheriff.
Yeah, and I think that's likely to be a big policy difference there. Remember, ICE also has complained that Sheriff McFadden, according to them, is not fulfilling the requirements of notifying them when someone's going to be released with an immigration hold. And McFadden has said he is, but I think that's still one of the defining issues. Well, on another law enforcement related topic, this week the Charlotte Ledger reported that the city of Charlotte won't release any details or the minutes from the closed session in which they approved a settlement and delayed severance agreement with CMPD Chief Johnny Jennings. That was worth more than $300,000. They say it's a personnel issue and thus confidential and exempt from public records laws, but Jennings already made the settlement public. So Steve, what's going on here?
Yeah, the city has maintained consistently that the actual settlement agreement was not a public record and was protected under his personnel file. And then Chief Jennings voluntarily released it himself. So that original position that the actual legal document, the legal settlement was not a public record was pretty unusual and wasn't consistent with how the city has handled settlements and things like this in the past. Now, I could assume their argument in terms of the actual closed session minutes and the ins and outs of how they debated this. I think they would argue that they are going to be talking about the chief's performance and how he did his job. Is the money warranted, et cetera, et cetera. I could see their argument for that should not be released. And I guess the only way, I mean, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, whether if Chief Jennings, in theory, could allow all of the minutes to be released. I don't think he will, and that's not going to happen. But the city at least has been consistent on this issue of not being transparent in the Jennings case.
And to be clear, public records laws apply to closed session meetings. The city has some exceptions they can get behind, but in general, those minutes are supposed to become public once the reason for the meeting being closed has passed. Don't we, the taxpayers, have a right to know exactly how and why elected officials are spending hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars on settlement with high-ranking city employees? I mean, it seems kind of outrageous that we don't get all those minutes and details.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the one of the clear exemptions on closed session meetings are personnel discussions and decisions. So when the city council goes in to discuss the performance of the manager or the attorney, et cetera, those are clearly exempted under state law. I think the debate here is whether discussion of a settlement would fall under personnel or whether that would be, clearly under this legal settlement. And as you said, our right to know what their thinking was. But yes, the city and all local governments do have the ability to discuss personnel issues in closed session with no future disclosure. The question again is, does this settlement fall under that or a different category?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I am a nosy journalist and a taxpayer, and I think it should be released. But that's just me. All right, so on to some ripple effects from decisions in Washington. In the wake of President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, Mecklenburg County commissioners heard a presentation this week about the possible impacts here, specifically for Medicaid and SNAP or food stamp recipients. Mecklenburg has the most of any in North Carolina, and of any of the counties. As work requirements for recipients and funding cuts kick in, commissioners heard that more than 80,000 Mecklenburg County residents could lose health insurance and 17,000 could lose food stamps in the next 2 years. Commissioner Lee Altman said that's a frightening prospect.
I have a feeling of vertigo, like I'm standing on a cliff that I'm about to fall off of. And I respect the manager's statement that we don't want to alarm or scare anybody, but I have to say I'm both alarmed and scared. Sure.
So as we are facing this uncertainty and this cliff, what are local leaders and groups doing to prepare?
The new Mecklenburg County manager, Michael Bryant, he gave a briefing and his take was that it could cost the county as much as $53 million to cover the coverage for the people that who could lose their benefits. He said that even if the state comes in and offers some assistance, 33,000 people in Mecklenburg could lose their Medicaid coverage. And this was something that came up. This was the same night. It came up earlier in the night when former Mayor Jennifer Roberts was speaking about the proposed transit tax, and she kind of connected the two issues and said, look, this is a really hard time right now with so many people at risk of losing coverage. You may have to spend money, you being the county, to provide coverage. And now we're talking about a very expensive 1 cent increase to the sales tax. And her message was people were hurting. Perhaps this isn't the right time to move forward with the plan.
And also, I was just going to say that all these Medicaid requirements, they've been these things put up, all these people aren't working and they're getting this money. But actually, most people on Medicaid, I believe, do work or they're caregivers. And a lot of folks have said people who will qualify will just get tied up in endless paperwork that the federal government is going to require. And so they'll just throw up their hands and give up. So unfortunately, there'll be a lot of people maybe off of Medicaid and other benefits who do qualify, but just won't be able to get the paperwork that the federal government requires. And so the states will be making that up as well, which is a real shame.
Yep, and the local money to make that up from the county comes primarily through property taxes, so that's a potential local impact on all of us here. And the county is convening a meeting next month with more than 20 nonprofits who are directly involved in social services to talk about how they're going to adapt to this. Julian, I know you've talked to a lot of nonprofits in the past few months that help people dealing with all kinds of insecurity. What is the mood in that sector as these cuts kind of move from hypothetical to reality?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of unknown right now. And at the end of the day, it's taking a toll on the people that work at these nonprofits. A lot of these people, these employees are getting laid off, they're being furloughed. They don't know what's next in their professional careers as well. So, in addition to helping people in the community, it's affecting all these people personally as well.
And as Congress has eliminated funding for public broadcasting, PBS North Carolina is offering buyouts to most of its 140 staff members. It could lose up to a quarter of its employees. It's based in the Triangle, but serves the entire state. And PBS NC, they're facing a cash cut of nearly $5 million from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, about 15% of the station's overall budget. Here's CEO David Crabtree, who leads PBS NC, talking this week.
PBS is not going away. PBS North Carolina is not going away.
But he acknowledged that changes, some of them painful, are coming.
A Band-Aid approach won't work for us. We have to make a fundamental change in our business model and in our overall production model. And we have to adapt to the times.
So how might local programming be impacted, and what do we know about what that looks like?
Well, they have said that they are going to try to retain local programming like State Lines, North Carolina Weekend, NC Weekend, and they're going to put a pause on some plans they had to move from the Research Triangle into a headquarters in Raleigh. But we know that even though donors have been quite generous to all of these organizations affected by cuts to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, they cannot make that shortfall up themselves. We've seen PBS Charlotte, which will affect folks here as well, being cut $1.2 million, up to 25% perhaps of their budget. And so obviously there's going to be staffing cuts, and we'll see that as well. So they will try to adapt, as he said, to the new business model, but our coverage won't look the same, obviously.
And as a public radio station, WFAE also received funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, in our case about 10% of total revenue. And due to the decision to rescind funds at the federal level, WFAE has already had to make staff cuts, which have been detailed on this program and elsewhere. So we got about a minute left, and I just wanted to ask quickly, a theme we're seeing in a lot of these cuts from the federal government is pushing responsibility to make up for the funding shortfalls onto local and state governments if they choose to, and even onto local communities, basically having people donate more to food banks and stuff like that. On one side that's viewed as a negative, but on the conservative side, that's viewed as a positive, as the goal that they've been pushing to for a long time, shrinking the federal government. So when we come back from this break, I'd like to just talk about that for a minute and those different perspectives on who should be responsible for funding these services. That's ahead on the Charlotte Talks Local News Roundup here on 90.7 WFAE.
Coming up in 20 minutes, after months of delays, President Trump's tariffs went into effect. Vice President J.D. Vance promoted data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that showed an increase in jobs among U.S.-born residents as recently as last week, and the latest on the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. 1A covers those stories and more at 10 on WFAE.
Hi, it's Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. You may have heard that prices for used vehicles are up. That car you've been thinking about donating to this station?
That car could be worth hundreds of dollars or even more in support.
If you don't need it, donate it. It's easy, it's free to you, and the proceeds help us bring you the news.
Learn more on this station's website.
Get started today at wfae.org/cars.
Support comes from the terraces at Brightmoor of South Charlotte, When support is needed for daily living, the team at the Terraces is committed to helping residents enjoy their life to the fullest. More at brightmoreofsouthcharlotte.com. And by the Gay Men's Chorus of Charlotte, featuring Icons Pride Goes Pop, a choral concert featuring music from 50 years of LGBTQ pride. Friday, August 15th at First United Methodist Church. Tickets at gmccharlotte.org.
It's the Friday Local News Roundup here on Charlotte Talks on 90.7 WFAE. I'm Eli Portillo in this morning for Mike Collins. We've got WFAE politics reporter Steve Harrison, Julian Berger, who covers immigration for WFAE, Mary C. Curtis, columnist at Rollcall and host of the Equal Time podcast, and Hunter Sáenz, reporter for WSOC-TV, with us to talk about the news of the week. So at the end of the last segment, we were talking about cuts to the federal government and federal spending and how a lot of that responsibility is being pushed onto state, local governments, and also the nonprofit and kind of just community sector. I think there can be a reflex to view that as a bad thing. And there are also lots of people who think that's a good thing, who are saying, yes, the federal government should spend less and it should be local responsibilities. I'm just curious for your thoughts on how that's playing out and how we're seeing that play out here in the Charlotte region.
Well, I think people have to remember you're saying a reduction in sort of this feeling that there is a public good, a common good in all of these things that we should share. Remember things like Social Security and Medicare, which people totally depend on now, so they won't be pushed into poverty, having to depend on families that often can't take care of them, have to do without medical care. They were once thought of as radical socialist notions, and now they are really a part of the bedrock of this country. And think of education. When you had folks who were disabled, children, they weren't integrated into public schools until we had things like the Department of Education saying that every child deserves these kinds of services. So it's easy to say we don't need these things because they're so invisible now. And things like food banks, we've seen with people losing their jobs, with all these organizations laying people off. There are people who used to donate to food banks who now depend on them for their food. So I do believe that when people who say the federal government shouldn't do this, they really kind of forget all the services that the federal government provides. And as far as public broadcasting, remember with Hurricane Helene that the public station there, the radio station there was in business the whole time. First responders were getting information from them. People would turn to them as a source of information that was life or death. So I think when we say this, we have to make sure we realize what services all of these organizations provide that we all depend on, or people in our family depend on, or we might depend on as we get older or disabled.
Well, speaking of spending, it is August, even if you haven't noticed with all the cool weather we've had this week, but North Carolina still doesn't have a budget for the fiscal year that started in July. That means the state is basically cruising along on prior year spending levels. This week, Governor Stein reluctantly signed a mini budget that funds some step increases for teachers and state employees, but doesn't address bigger questions like raises for state employees and substantial tax cuts or big spending plans. He called it a Band-Aid.
It fails our Medicaid beneficiaries, and there are going to be real consequences on human life because of that failure. It fails state employees. Inflation is real, and there are no pay raises for state employees in this mini budget.
So the legislature might come back at the end of August. There are still big differences between the House and Senate budget ideas. But what is going on here? Because the Republicans, again, control both houses. Why can't they agree on a spending plan, Steve?
Yeah, the House and the Senate are still really far apart on a lot of key issues. One of them is a question of whether to slow down some of the scheduled tax cuts that are scheduled to go into effect later this decade. There are other issues as well, and they're really not even close. I mean, there's often disagreements between the two chambers during budget time. In 2025, they seem to be larger than in past years. And so now we have this so-called mini budget that Governor Stein is signing because he says, but quote, keeps the lights on.
And what does it look like for those chambers if they don't come back together? Do we just continue on prior year funding with no big funding increases or other changes?
That's right. Yeah, we will just continue with the status quo. The mini budget does have some, there are some additions. There is some new money for Medicaid that the Stein's administration says that's not enough. The mini budget has 61 new positions at the DMV, which I think everyone in the state can celebrate. It's also created this new Office of Division, Accountability, Value, and Efficiency, DAVE, which will be under State Auditor Dave Bullock. This is essentially like a North Carolina state-level version of DOJ in Washington. So there are a few new pieces, but again, overall, I think to go back to what the governor said, it just kind of keeps the lights on.
Well, you mentioned the DMV, and people probably hearts seized in fear across our listening region because the DMV has been extremely painful to interact with for a lot of people in the past few years. State Auditor Dave Bullock this week released an audit that falls into the category of things you probably already knew, because the takeaway was that the DMV is badly broken. So, Hunter, what did he find and what does he want to do about it?
Yeah, so the audit found that there are systemic challenges, especially with the current governance structure. So the DMV falls under the NCDOT. And basically what he is arguing is that the DMV, by that very nature, doesn't have direct control over its budget, which means their staffing requests often go unfunded at the 100% level. I think it was roughly 30% actually made it to lawmakers' desks to try to debate. And then he also found that, which I just saw as kind of striking, is that the DMV brings in 30% of the NCDOT's revenue, but it's only 3% of their expenditures. So it's clearly very underfunded, and he would like to see it actually split away and be independent away from the NCDOT. Governor Stein, though, pushes back against that recommendation.
And here is Dave Bullock, the auditor, talking about the DMV and his findings. Oh, all right, I'm hearing we don't have that, but Governor Stein does say that the state needs to fund more than the 60 or so DMV examiners that are in the budget right now, and that they should not reorganize it, but instead should give it more money.
We're a fast-growing state. We're like the third fastest-growing state in the country. We add tons of people on a daily basis. There hasn't been an increase in DMV folks in a long time.
And have any of you been to the DMV recently? Because I read that audit and basically found myself just yelling, yes, 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 all true. I had to go get a real ID, and it took more than 2 months for me to find an appointment, and that appointment was at 7 a.m. and about an hour from my house. So
It's actually, go ahead, Steve.
No, go ahead, Hunter.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, like, I haven't personally dealt with it. I will say I've seen the long lines from covering other stories. I know that my colleague Joe Bruno recently did a story that there are people who you can pay to actually sit in line for you and then call you like when you're like next in line so you can get there with all of your documentation. I mean, that's the links that people are going to.
Yeah, I have to go get my youngest needs her driver's permit. And I went out to the Arrowwood location, which opens at 7 a.m. It looks like people are starting to line up around 4:45 or 5 in the morning. So at some point here in the next week or two, that's going to be my start to my day, is bringing a folding chair and sitting in the dark.
do you want to just host Morning Edition if you're up that early already? You know, just give our normal host a day off.
You
On
guys
location.
You guys can do a live phone in with me. I'll give you the update.
Yeah. And, you know, to take it to a more serious level, I think that you can make an argument that this chronic underfunding of the DMV and the resulting pain for people who are trying to use a government service that is truly essential is a good example of what can happen when you don't pay for the services that, as Mary was saying, provide a collective good.
Yeah, but if you want to prove that government doesn't work, which is a talking point of a lot of the GOP, the thing to do is underfund it and make sure it doesn't, and then say, well, private people, or something like that. So that's a surefire way to do it.
Yeah, there is no better way to make you a skeptic of government services than trying to get a real ID, I've discovered. Hopefully, though, that'll be fixed, because there are other arguments, like I had to renew my passport recently, and that system, which they just funded and overhauled, was super easy. So it can be done. Well, a family in Union County is suing American Airlines after a flight attendant was sentenced to federal prison for illegally recording passengers in an airplane's bathroom. That family attorney says American Airlines should have known that the man, Estes Carter Thompson, was a risk to minors because his coworkers had made complaints to the airline about his conduct before this happened. American was also sued by the family of the girl who actually found the iPhone which was recording people, and they've settled. So, Hunter, what do we know about this latest case?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, first off, this started when a 14-year-old girl from Charlotte was flying to Boston back in 2023. She goes and uses the lavatory on board, and she sees this type of red tape that is really only available to staff on board. And it's taped to the back of the toilet seat to basically say that the seat is broken. And underneath the seat, you can see a phone's camera sticking out with the flash on. She was skeptical. She went and told her parents. Of course, they investigated, arrested Thompson there. Then, of course, the FBI gets involved. They look through his iCloud account and find that there are 4 other victims over 9 months that he was doing this to. And we can say was doing this because he has been convicted with all 5 victims. And is serving 18 and a half years in prison. But that iCloud account then had pictures of a Union County girl. 2 FBI agents went to that family's home, spoke to the mother, showed her the pictures of her daughter that had, of course, her private parts in that bathroom, and said, "We believe this is your daughter." They, of course, were stunned, disgusted, and ended up interviewing that daughter and built a case over it. Of course, now that Union County family, like you said, is suing American Airlines. I will say American Airlines said they are reviewing the complaint. Of course, they're not commenting much further, but they have already settled with the 14-year-old girl's family on that trip to Boston. So we will see how this kind of plays out.
Yeah, disturbing case that still has ramifications, still settling out. And here's a full statement from American. They said their core mission is to care for people, and the foundation of that is safety and security of their customers, of our customers and team. We're reviewing the complaint and take the allegations involving a former team member very seriously. Well, yesterday in Charlotte, attorney James Ferguson was laid to rest. Known as Fergie by folks far and near, he was a civil rights lawyer and activist in Charlotte who won the critical case, Swan versus Charlotte Mecklenburg Board of Education, that launched busing as a desegregation tool for schools nationwide. He also co-founded the first integrated law firm in North Carolina. One of his partners was Adam Stein, father of our state's current governor. Here is former Charlotte Mayor Anthony Fox speaking at Fergie's funeral at the Park Church.
He and the firm delivered blows to Jim Crow, fighting desegregation battles, attacking employment discrimination and voting inequities, seeking to reform a criminal justice system he believed to be deeply flawed.
And James Ferguson was 82 years old. He continued to practice law and speak with young folks and activists up until extremely recently. Mary, what do you see as his legacy in Charlotte and more broadly?
Well, I think it's interesting to note, besides being involved in these landmark cases, he was so accessible, approachable, and he trained lawyers nationally and internationally. So I think an important piece of it is that his legacy will live on through the next generations of lawyers he has trained. You know, we know the Swan case, the Wilmington 10, where he freed the unjustly imprisoned civil rights activist, and his work as a lawyer, his work freeing Darrell Hunt here in North Carolina, unjustly imprisoned for falsely being accused of rape. But as I said, he was, I knew him, Fergie. He was just there, whatever kind of advice you needed. And he was very wise. And thank goodness, many generations of lawyers will be here to help others.
Yeah, one small anecdote is I was talking with someone about his funeral yesterday, and the person just said, "Oh yeah, I just met him a few months ago," and pulled up a picture, and there he was talking with him, and that was just a few months ago while he was suffering from some illnesses and still being accessible. So I think that's a notable legacy and tells you about his approach. Well, tonight, the Panthers take the field again. It's their first preseason game. There's some optimism in the air like there usually is in August. They closed last season on a pretty strong note, and they've added some pieces. But probably more attention nationally is going to be on the Cleveland Browns rookie quarterback. Is that right?
Yeah, Shedeur Sanders, the big drama around his drafting, but his high-profile college career, his high-profile father and coach, Deion Sanders. But, Dave Canales, the coach of the Panthers, says he is going to play a lot of first-string players in the preseason games, which he didn't last year, and they thought that didn't work out so well. So you'll see Bryce and see what kind of chemistry he has with the rookie, and hope springs eternal. It's preseason.
That's right. It's preseason and the fall weather's already here, so let's enjoy it. That's Mary C. Curtis, columnist at Rollcall, host of the Equal Time podcast. We also had Julian Berger, who covers immigration, Hunter Sáenz, reporter for WSOC-TV, and WFAE's politics reporter, Steve Harrison. I'm Eli Portillo, in this morning for Mike Collins. This has been the Friday Local News Roundup on Charlotte Talks. We'll see you on Monday.
Charlotte Talks is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from Mazda of South Charlotte. Our executive producer is